it is my very great pleasure to introduce a very, 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 very special young lady who has more energy than a superhero. And I really mean that. She is one of the owners of ComForCare Senior Services in Palm Beach, Martin, St. Lucie, and Indian River counties. I can safely say she and her family, who I've now begun to really know, are dedicated to helping preserve the well-being and care for people and their loved ones. I have really come to know them now, and I just think they're all fabulous and wonderful. Melissa volunteers her time and facilitates support groups for people living with Parkinson's. And I am very proud and honored to say that we are lucky to have her on our advisory board for our foundation. It is with pleasure and pride that I introduce Melissa Morante.
Thank you, Beth. So I had the great fortune of meeting Beth, gosh, I don't know, it feels like maybe 2 years ago now, right? I don't, maybe three. Time has sort of disappeared over the last 6 or 7 months, but I had the great fortune to meet Beth, and we share the same mission, which is to make sure that people who are living with Parkinson's and other neurological disorders have the resources and support that they need. And fundraising is great because it goes to research, but there is, people need help like today, and living with their diseases. And when I talk about diseases, I deliberately use the term living with. We frequently have people come to us and say, my loved one is dying from Alzheimer's, and they're not dying from Alzheimer's. Tino's going to talk about that in a couple of weeks, but they're living with it. And we have to make sure that we help people live with it and live their best life possible. So Beth did an introduction. I'll breeze over this quickly. I am super excited to be on the advisory committee for the Mind, Music, and Movement Foundation. Beth and I have been talking about it for a long time, and I cannot wait to see what else we are going to bring to the table. I just said to her before this started, my gosh, it seems like it exploded overnight. So I'm super excited. I am a board member of the American Parkinson Disease Association. Beth mentioned support groups. I facilitate when things are normal. I facilitate 7 Parkinson support groups. One of them is very specific to deep brain stimulation, and I co-facilitate that group with Dr. Dalby. I am a certified group fitness instructor. I have a specialty in senior fitness and Parkinson's exercise. As Beth mentioned, I am one of the owners of ComForCare Senior Services. This particular topic does lend itself to home care, although I likely won't mention ComForCare Senior Services again unless anybody has a question. And then just so you guys know, I am a health and wellness lunatic. Everyone in my family thinks I'm crazy, but that's okay because they'll thank me for it later, I'm sure. So I'm gonna start with a story. So a couple of years ago, about 1.5 years ago, a good friend called and she said, and her mother had been living with Alzheimer's for quite some time, and she was nearing the end stage. And she said to me, Melissa, I just want to be her daughter. And I said to her, when that is a sign, right? When your role goes from loved one, wife, husband, brother, sister, niece, whatever the case may be, daughter, son, right? Into, I am just like, I'm the caregiver now, and I'm so exhausted. All I do is just, I take care of her and I don't feel like her daughter anymore. That is a sign. And when you are not taking care of yourself, right, you are no good to the person that you are taking care of. There's a statistic out there, and I don't know if this is exactly right, but somewhere in the neighborhood of 65% of family caregivers will predecease their loved one that they're taking care of. So then the question becomes, well, then what? What happens to that person that you've been taking care of? Who is going to take care of them? So yes, of course, paperwork and wishes and all of that stuff is very important, but taking care of yourself as a caregiver so that you can be the best caregiver, right? And be the daughter, wife, fill in the blank that you can be, critical. but it's incredibly overwhelming. So how do you even start that process? I think the first thing you have to do is sort of figure out, all right, do I need help, right? What's going on right now where I feel like I'm not sure that I can do this anymore on my own? And here's some of the signs, and none of this should be surprising, right? You start to get very stressed and overwhelmed. You are exhausted, you're agitated, you start to get resentful. Obviously, you're not sleeping. You start to self-isolate, give up your social life, right? You go through all of the feelings of grief, you're angry, right? So these are signs, right? Maybe you start to self-medicate. Maybe one drink at dinner becomes 2 drinks, becomes 3 drinks. Maybe a drink at dinner is now a couple drinks at lunch. Like, those are the things where you have to say to yourself, okay, this is not who I am, and I think I need help. So you have to do that before it affects your health and well-being. Like I just said, you are no good to your care receiver, right, if you're not taking care of yourself. There are some options. There's not just one option. There's lots of ways to go about bringing help into the home. So let's talk about it. When you think about bringing help into the home, typically what people are asking for is a caregiver, and that is called private duty home care. There are 2 business models, really 3, but 2 business models that offer private duty home care services. And what that means is a caregiver comes into the home. They offer, at the very base level, companionship, all the way up through assistance with activities of daily living. In certain situations, there is what's called private duty skilled care. So by that, I mean functions that a nurse would perform. If a private duty agency has a skilled license, we happen to have one, they can provide those skilled services. So that would be if somebody were to need, if they had surgery and they needed a bandage changed, or if somebody was diabetic and they could no longer give themselves insulin. Things that sound ridiculous to you, but Florida is a very heavily regulated state. So even things like putting in eye drops, those are things that are considered skilled care. And so someone needs to have a special license to do that. But private duty home care is companionship up to help with activities of daily living. So helping with bathing, dressing, transferring, ambulation, continent care, and then they do what's called instrumental activities of daily living. Those are things like laundry, some light housekeeping, maybe taking someone to a doctor's appointment, running errands, grocery shopping, meal preparation, medication reminders. We'll get into medication in a little bit and the rules there with caregivers. Typically it's hourly. Someone comes in, you as the client, we call them clients because it's typically non-medical, client or patient. Caregiver comes in, you dictate the schedule Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. Maybe it's Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 9 to 1. It's whatever you think you need in terms of help. All the way up to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Some caregivers live in if that's the need. So the 2 business models, one is called a nurse registry, one is called a home health agency. These companies look very similar and they offer the same services. However, the main difference is who is the employer at the time the services are provided. So when you are working with a nurse registry, you, the client or family member, takes on the role and risk of employer. So by that I mean, if that caregiver that's working for a nurse registry is in your home and they fall and they file for lost wages and medical bills, which for another, for a company would be workers' comp, you, the client, are responsible for those costs. If that same caregiver does not pay their taxes, you, the client, may get a nice little letter from the IRS. When you work with an agency, agencies are the employer. Those caregivers that work for agencies are W-2, they're licensed, bonded, insured, taxes are coming out of their paycheck, they're covered under the agency's workers' comp. The other difference is agencies by law are allowed to train above and beyond what the state requires. Registries, those caregivers are independent contractors, and therefore they are deemed experts in their field. So by law, registries are not allowed to train their caregivers. So I'll give you an example. In order to get your HHA certificate or your CNA license, you must have your Alzheimer's and dementia in service. I think it might be 2 hours of, classroom type training. Registries cannot train beyond that. In my office, by way of example, Tino is a nationally certified Alzheimer's educator. We train our caregivers on real life, how to work with somebody who's living with Alzheimer's. I do the same for Parkinson's. I train all of our caregivers on how to work with somebody who's living with Parkinson's. Lots of things to know, right? Timing of medication is super critical, right? Balance is super critical, right? Knowing that mornings are oftentimes tough, understanding how long it takes medication to kick in, knowing what to eat when you're taking your medication. Those are things that they're likely not getting when they go for their certificates or their licenses. The other difference with agencies and registries, agencies have a fairly robust roster of caregivers. So if, for example, a caregiver gets sick or they need time off, agencies can send a fill-in. When you're working with an independent contractor or a nurse registry, there may not be a replacement for you, and then you're stuck without care. Payment, and we'll get into payment in a little bit in greater detail. Medicare does not pay for private duty home care. We get asked that question every single day. Medicare does not pay for private duty. What Medicare pays for is maybe an occasional bath visit once you come home from the hospital, but they pay for physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, wound care. That's Medicare. What covers private duty is if you have long-term care insurance, that is a separate insurance policy. You pay a premium every year. You likely have an elimination period, which is like the deductible. That pays for private duty. VA benefits pay for private duty. Sometimes Medicaid, if the patient or client is approved by Medicaid to receive a few hours a week of care, otherwise private duty is paid out of pocket. Registries are typically less per hour than agencies for all of the reasons I mentioned at the beginning. Registries don't have the costs associated with hiring with caregivers that agencies do, right? We're paying workers' comp, taxes, all of those things, okay? So, all right, you've decided that you need help. Well, where do I even start? What questions am I supposed to be asking, right? So let's go through a couple of questions. You really want to know who you're working with, right? You want to know if you're working with an agency or a registry. And I will be completely honest with you. There are certain times where money really is a factor. Let's just be honest. And sometimes a registry is the only option. And that is okay, but you just need to be mindful and be aware of, the risks that are involved. By the way, the same questions apply as it relates to the caregiver and the kind of care that your loved one is receiving, because caregivers can work for registries and agencies. It's a question of who's the employer at the time of service for you, okay? So, questions we get asked all the time. Do your caregivers speak English? yes, they do speak English. Most of the caregiver population is from Haiti or Jamaica down here in South Florida. So we certainly have accents, but everybody does, at least my caregivers, everybody speaks English. They have to pass a test given in English and writing, and they must pass with an 80% or better. So speaking and understanding English is critical, because let's be honest, if somebody's 90 and they're living with Alzheimer's, if I have trouble understanding them and you have trouble understanding them, there is no way that mom who's 90 living with Alzheimer's is going to understand the caregiver. Right? You want to know hiring process, background checks. How do you ensure that this person is, okay to be in my home, that they don't have a criminal record, those kinds of things. What about an opening assessment? Opening assessments are really important, because what happens is it creates a baseline so that as needs change, right, caregivers, and we have a director of nursing who opens up our cases, right, we can see if that plan of care needs to be changed. When people are living with progressive chronic illnesses, the plan of care is going to change. The needs are going to change. And so if we have a great baseline and we understand what's happening, we can provide better care. Okay, so I mentioned licenses, HHAs and CNAs. Home health aides and certified nursing assistants in the state of Florida can do, in the home in the state of Florida, do exactly the same thing. Where CNAs can do a little bit more is when they're working in facilities under the direct supervision of a nurse. But in the home, people always say to me, I want a CNA. I said, well, it doesn't actually matter, because they're doing exactly the same thing. And I may have a CNA that graduated yesterday, but I have an HHA who's been with me for 20 years or 10 years, right? And she's, more than qualified to take care of you. So those are the licenses and certifications that they hold. Be mindful of what's called a companion. There are companion agencies. Companions, by law, are not allowed to touch a client. Meaning that even if mom doesn't need help in the shower, even if mom can get dressed by herself and get to the bathroom by herself, but she needs a little bit of help getting in and out of the car, companions by law cannot do that. They cannot hold her hand or her arm and help her in and out of the car. So that's something that's really important. The other thing that's really important for those who live in Palm Beach County, 2016, 2017, there was a Palm Beach County ordinance that went into effect. I am proud to say that our CEO was the only home care agency representative that had a hand in working with law enforcement to write that ordinance. Anybody that is taking care of a vulnerable adult must have a Palm Beach County license. It's a badge, and it must be displayed. So if mom and the caregiver are at CVS picking up a prescription, and the sheriff comes in and says to the caregiver, let me see your badge. Oh, I don't have it. Well, that's unfortunate, because it is a $500 a day desk fine for every day that you're working without your badge, and potential jail time. This ordinance was written as an effort to protect seniors, right? We've heard these stories. Cleaning lady turned caregiver, right? Elder fraud, abuse, and exploitation. We really want to make sure that this vulnerable population is being cared for by those who are qualified to do so. Okay. All right. So changing schedules, caregiver calling off, these things happen all the time. Doctor's appointments changed. When you work with an agency, you call the office, you talk to the scheduling department, you express the need to change, and they'll make a change. Now, look, it doesn't always mean you'll get the same caregiver, because that caregiver that was working for you Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9 to 1, might be working for somebody else those same days in the evenings. So if you need to switch to the evenings, you might have to be open to having a new caregiver. I mentioned earlier, caregivers calling off. When you work with agencies, they simply send a fill-in, okay? After hours emergencies. So you want to make sure that somebody is available by phone should somebody be rushed to the hospital overnight in an emergency, so that the caregiver knows either A, not to come to the house, but to go to the hospital if that's the need, or, you know, we'll call you when he or she is discharged and we'll resume services. So if something does happen overnight, you want to make sure there's a way to reach somebody in the office that can get to the caregiver. You want to know if the caregiver can drive. It's your decision as the client whether or not the caregiver drives their own car or yours. That is absolutely 100% personal preference. There are no rules. How often do you reassess? I talked about the opening assessment and the baseline and how often needs change, right? I can tell you we do it every 6 months unless something happens. So if somebody were to go to the hospital and come home, my nurse will go out and see them when they come home to assess if something has changed and if we need to alter that plan of care. Disease-specific training. So we touched on it a little bit, right? When you are caring for a loved one with Alzheimer's or another type of dementia or Parkinson's or MS, right? The needs are very, very specific. And for those of you that heard Scott speak a couple of weeks ago, I'm sure you heard him say, once you met one person with Alzheimer's, you've met one person with Alzheimer's. The same is true of Parkinson's, right? So I want to know if my caregiver has ever worked with somebody with Parkinson's disease before. Do they understand the real needs? Okay. Consistency in caregiver. I will tell you this, everybody wins when there's consistency in caregivers. Now, it is a lot like dating, and so you don't always marry the first one that you meet. Sometimes it takes a little while to find the permanent match. Lots of factors play into consistency in caregiver schedules, of course, personalities. You know, sometimes the client doesn't like the caregiver, but sometimes the caregiver doesn't like the client and says, I'm not going back. So there's lots of things that go into making a good match. You want to know if the agency will accept long-term care insurance. Registries, oftentimes, as long as the provider is qualified, long-term care insurance may cover if you work with a nurse registry. You would have to talk to your long-term care insurance company, give them the name of the provider so that they understand and they can check to make sure that they are an approved provider. Assignment of benefits. A lot of people don't understand long-term care insurance, and on the agency and registry side, how to bill for it. And so assignment of benefits simply means you, the policy holder, assign us, the agency, the benefits. So we bill the insurance company, they pay us directly, and it takes you out. Sometimes clients aren't comfortable with that and they'd rather just pay us and then get reimbursed by the insurance company. That's completely fine. It's just a service that we offer, and we do have a very good understanding of the benefits and how to help policy holders really understand how their long-term care benefits can translate into care. Okay. Oh, do you have a minimum number of hours per day or per week that the patient has to commit to? So what if I wanted to do only 1 hour a day, 1 day a week? Well, you could do that, but here are some challenges with that, okay? Just caregivers don't want to leave their house for 1 hour, okay? So you have to pay the caregiver more, which means the agency has to charge you more. And the truth of the matter is if you really only need like there's enough stuff to do, right? To figure out how to do maybe 2 hours a day or 4 hours a day. You know, when you do 2 and 3 hours a day, it actually is not cost effective at all. It's more cost effective to do 4 hours. But you can only do 1 day a week. A lot of times when people have an elimination period to satisfy with their long-term care insurance plan, they try and do as little as possible, right? When the needs are not so great and there's that out-of-pocket portion that they have to pay, they want to get through that with as little out-of-pocket cost as possible. So that's when a schedule like maybe 4 hours, 1 day a week is the right thing to do. It may take you a little bit longer to get through the elimination period, but it's less out of pocket. And then once the benefit kicks in, you can up your hours because now the insurance company is paying for it. And let's face it, you've paid into this policy for all these years, right? You paid it and you got it so you could use it. You want to know if people charge a premium for nights and weekends. Okay, so similar questions, of course, if you're working with a registry or an independent contractor, but you really have to do the digging in as far as background checks, as far as what kind of experience and training have they had. Now, look, the registry is not allowed by law to train. Perhaps they're also working for an agency and they have had Parkinson's and Alzheimer's training. But you really want to know what experience this person has, and you really need to do the background checks to make sure that whoever you're letting into your home is the person that you want in your home. So it's like anything else, right? You want to trust your gut. So when you are interviewing caregivers, if you're going to go the nurse registry independent caregiver route, right? Trust your gut, do the research, you know, really understand who this person is, ask for references and check them, right? Do the criminal background check, do the credit check, make sure their driving record is clean, talk about their experience. You know, it's like any other job interview. Now, when you work with an agency, we like to say, interview the agency, not the caregiver. And I'll tell you why. People ask us all the time. So can we set up, we'd like to interview like 3 caregivers and then we'll pick which one. No, that is not how it works. And I will tell you why. There is no increased success rate in interviewing caregivers because you, the daughter, are there with mom and you're interviewing this caregiver and everybody's on their best behavior, right? The caregiver says and does everything right. You might be looking at it through your lens and not mom's lens, right? The rubber meets the road when it is mom and the caregiver, and it is not on day 1, right? So tell people, look, by day 3, day 4, you know if it's a good match or not, you'll know. Unless something really significant happens on day 1, I always say we're not making a decision today on whether or not this is the right fit for you. So caregiver roulette, right? If you call me at 6 o'clock on Friday night and tell me you need somebody ASAP, you are going to get the first person who answers their phone. That is just the reality. Like, the more time, the better. There is a science behind the match of placing caregivers with clients. I mentioned it before, training, experience, personality, schedules, geography, all of those things go into play. But I can make anything happen relatively quickly. It's first available, not best available when it's an emergency. You give me 24 to 48 hours, we'll have a good match, right? Make sure you understand, and we're going to talk about it in a second, make sure you understand what the caregivers are allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. There are some rules. Make sure that you have a sense, and the agency, or even the registry, but the agency can help you figure out what kind of schedule makes sense. Lots of things go into play there. Is the morning time the hardest? Do you as the spouse have a commitment and you are you're uncomfortable leaving your loved one alone? So we have to schedule around your schedule. Those are things to consider. I mentioned it in passing, but remember, like, mom's the client, right? I'm just using mom as an example, but right, like the loved one with the chronic illness is the client. This is about what's best for her or him, right? Not about what you think is best for her or him, okay? And so when you work with somebody who is really knowledgeable in chronic illnesses, right, they can help you figure that out, and they can tell you how this is going to go. Okay. So I'm going to fly through some of these things. Again, making sure the training, it is really key. You want to make sure that these caregivers have very disease-specific training. Working with Parkinson's and Alzheimer's is challenging, and people really need to know, what they're doing. As an agency, we always talk about, obviously, physical needs. Safety and security is priority. We want to make sure that nobody gets hurt, but social needs are equally as important, right? We need to make sure that there's engagement. We don't want somebody just sitting in front of a TV. Caregivers are not supposed to be on their phones, right? They're supposed to be there engaging, whether that's going for a walk, helping with exercising, making breakfast or lunch. If the client is taking a nap, right? Maybe the dishwasher needs to be emptied, maybe the laundry needs to be folded. Maybe there's some downtime to sit and check an email or make a phone call. Like I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that everybody on this call, on this Zoom, has made a personal call while they were at work. So nobody works 60 minutes of every hour. Again, that said, like, they're there to care for the loved one. So that's the priority, right? Recognizing when the disease is progressing and letting the office know, the caregiver should let the office know, let the nurse know, so that, they can reassess. And then making sure the aide knows, what is the schedule? Does dad like to shower before breakfast, or would rather get up and have coffee and breakfast and then take a shower? He doesn't want to miss, Wheel of Fortune. So we have to be home and sitting to watch Wheel of Fortune. Those are the things the caregiver needs to know. I also tell people, caregivers are not mind readers. They really, really, really want to do a good job, but they're not mind readers. So err on the side of over communication. You have to tell them what is important and what they need to know about your loved one. I talked a little bit about the licenses before. Some of the other letters you may see, we talked about companion and HHA and CNA. HHA, we don't see that here in Florida. PCA either, it's a personal care assistant, personal care technician. In MA, you would see like in a doctor's office, but not here. We talked about the Palm Beach County ordinance. Let me just touch on overtime for a minute. Any caregiver that works over 40 hours a week, by law, agencies have to pay them overtime, or they are required by law to pay overtime. So if you're working with a registry, you are required to pay overtime. They have to get paid overtime. That's just it. Like there's, it's a law. So just be mindful when you, if you're working with somebody, let's say you have somebody in the house 7 days a week, 8 hours a day, you're going to have 16 hours of overtime. There's lots of other ways to do that. If you wanted to have 2 caregivers in the home to try and minimize, having to pay overtime, lots of times that's doable. Somebody's in there 4 days a week and somebody's in there 3 days a week, and that minimizes your chance for overtime. Okay, here's what caregivers can do. They assist with all activities of daily living, which we talked about: bathing, dressing, toileting, feeding, and transferring an ambulation in and out of the bed, in and out of the chair. Assisting with self-administration of medication. It sounds like a mouthful, it's a little confusing. Caregivers here in Florida are not allowed to give medication. They can assist. So what that means is they're not allowed to fill pill boxes, but they can help mom open the pill box. They can help mom, hold her hand while she puts the pills in her mouth and give her some water to take it. What caregivers can also do is, if the medication is in the original bottle with the prescription label on it, they can take the pill out of the bottle and give it to mom. The reason why they can't take it out of the pill box is because technically they don't know what that is. And so they can't be responsible for giving mom medication that may not be the right medication. Okay. Things like eye drops, caregivers can hold mom's hand. Mom has to squeeze the bottle. It sounds silly, but it is. Light housekeeping. So caregivers are not cleaning girls. They're not going to mop the floors and clean the toilets. Obviously, if there's a spill or an accident, they will clean it up. They'll run a vacuum, they'll run a Swiffer, they'll empty the dishwasher, they'll clean up from meals, they'll help prepare meals. We talked about driving to and from appointments and errands. Socialization and cognitive stimulation, right? Engagement, that is critical. They need to be, whatever the socialization or cognitive stimulation is, it could be playing cards, it could be playing a game, it could be coloring, it could be helping them get on the Zoom so they can do their physical therapy or their exercise class, listening to music, right? Whatever it is, right? That's why they're there, and they're there to help. Some of this is repetitive. Again, want to make sure they have their licenses, they've been trained. You can ask about, agencies can't give you client references. It's a HIPAA violation, so know that. We get asked that a lot. You decide if the caregiver should wear scrubs or street clothes. That's a client preference. And if you are, I had this situation yesterday. So if you're a daughter who's not living at home, but you want to be there on day one to make introductions and show around and have the list, like, do that, right? Be present. Because again, they just need the information. They just want to do a great job. This is how this typically goes when a loved one, when a caregiver, family caregiver says, we're going to bring some help into the home. And it goes like this. The loved one with the disease, I do not need any help. I do not want any help. I can do this on my own. No one is coming in here. And then somehow we managed to get through the first week or so. Well, I'm not okay with this, but if everybody else is making me do it, then fine, I'll do it. And then another couple of weeks goes by and it says, well, I guess this isn't so bad. And then another couple of weeks goes by, or a couple of months go by, and it's like, how did we ever live without this? So the resistance at the beginning, it's always there. Nobody wants to bring in help. Well, it's awkward, right? You're bringing a stranger into the home. Men have a lot of pride. They don't want a female caregiver coming in to help them take a shower. There's lots of things that go into that. But the trick, or the message is really, this is for me, right? Me, family caregiver. This is for me. I need to know that you are safe, and I can't be here 24 hours a day. And so I have to be able to leave this house and sleep at night knowing that you are safe, okay? The other thing you have to realize, no one's going to do it the way you do it. So you have to pick your battles. I'll give you an example. We had a client whose daughter was adamant about him getting up and eating breakfast at 9 a.m. 9 a.m. He has to have breakfast. Well, he was getting up and he was eating at 10. He was like 94 and he had Alzheimer's. I mean, and she just would not let it go. And, we finally said to her, who is this bothering? Who is this bothering that he's eating breakfast at 10? He's not bothered by it. He's happy. Gets to sleep a little bit later. He wasn't hungry at night. He's eating. This is bothering you, and this isn't about you, right? So you just have to figure it. Now, look, if safety and security are compromised, that's a fair and valid argument. But if someone's eating breakfast at 10 instead of 9, unless it's interfering with Parkinson's medications, it's okay, right? If the dishwasher isn't loaded the way you would load it, that's okay, because you're not doing it, right? I said this before, err on the side of over communication, encourage the caregiver to ask questions, give them information, ask them questions. You know, obviously making sure that you're hiring somebody who's knowledgeable with what your needs are. And again, don't be afraid to say, look, I don't think this is working. If it's not a good fit, it's not a good fit, right? That is okay. Don't just say, this isn't working. Like, more information would be helpful. Like, why isn't it working? Is it a personality conflict? Is it that they clearly don't have the training? Is it that the language barrier is too great? Like, whatever the reasons are, because that information is really important when a scheduling team goes back to try and find a new caregiver, okay? And so I leave you with, it's the quality of care, not the severity of one's condition, that determines their quality of life. Okay. And that's all I have, but I'm happy to take questions.
That was really awesome, Melissa. Thank you. Everyone can unmute themselves.
Hello.
Hi there.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
We'll take
Good.
questions.
Good. I got on a little late due to internet problems, but I don't know if this was, did you go over things like monitoring the aid as far as cameras in the home and audio?
So people ask that a lot. I'm sure that doesn't surprise you. Look, I think if you have cameras in the home, I mean, look, that's your choice. You can absolutely put cameras in the home. Do you have to tell the aide? No. If you do tell the aide, you know, would you want to work somewhere where you were being monitored 24/7? They may be resistant to work there, not because they're doing anything wrong, but that is a comfort level. We have had some clients who have had cameras in their homes. We haven't had any negative repercussions, but that's a personal choice, and some people do it. Absolutely.